Top of the morning to you. Welcome to our special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay. The headlines. Russia, Ukraine neither commits to nor oppose International Atomic Energy Agency principles for safeguarding Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. Russian President Vladimir Putin accuses Ukraine of targeting civilians in Moscow's drone attack. Plus, British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to visit Washington next week for talks with U.S. President Joe Biden, with Ukraine on the menu. Thank you so much for joining us again this morning. Russia and Ukraine have not committed to respect the 5 principles laid out by the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, Chief Rafael Grossi, to try to safeguard Ukraine's Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Now, Mr. Grossi, who spoke at the UN Security Council, has tried for months to craft an agreement to reduce the risk of a catastrophic nuclear accident from military activity like shelling at Europe's biggest nuclear power plant. After addressing the Council, Mr. Grossi highlighted the fact that no party had rejected the plan outright, since no representative had voiced opposition to the principles.
But again, the important thing is that the minimum common denominator, which are these basic 5 principles, have been widely supported, and there was no voice opposing them. This is very important. This indicates that what we are saying is something no one has a contradictory view upon. And we are, in any case, going to be getting the information and transmitting it to the Ukrainian regulator for their information, which is a mitigation. It's not an ideal situation, but again, it indicates the usefulness of the presence of the IAEA to bridge these gaps. You know, the IAEA has maybe one single power. It is the power of the pen. And we report immediately, and the international community will know immediately from an authoritative source what is happening. We believe that this is a deterrent factor in case anybody would have the idea to attack a nuclear power plant. It's not enough. We need peace. We need the complete stabilization of the situation.
Meanwhile, the IAEA chief, Rafael Grossi, just speaking, his 5 principles included that there should be no attack on or from the plant, and that no heavy weapons built as multiple rocket launchers, artillery systems and munitions, and tanks or military personnel be housed there. Mr. Grossi further called for off-site power to the plant to remain available and secure, for all its essential systems to be protected from attack or sabotage, and for no actions that undermine these principles. Mr. Vasily Nebenzia, the Security Council representative for Russia, said his government shared the concerns outlined by the IAEA chief and blamed Ukraine for shelling that could affect the plant's safety. Meanwhile, Ukraine's representative Sergei Kisletisia says Russia had both personnel and weaponry at the site's turbine buildings, and added his government supports the commitment of the IAEA Director General for these inappropriate situations to be handled and restore nuclear safety. Russian President Vladimir Putin said that Ukraine's biggest ever drone strike on Moscow was an attempt to scare and provoke Russia. And air defenses around the capital will be strengthened. Russia said 8 drones targeted civilian areas of Moscow and the Moscow region with a population of over 21 million in the early hours of Tuesday, but were either shot down or diverted with special electronic jammers. Mr. Putin cast the assault, which brought the 15-month conflict in Ukraine to the heart of Russia, as a terrorist response that came after Russia struck at Ukraine's military intelligence headquarters several days ago. However, a Ukrainian presidential aide denied Kyiv was directly involved in the Moscow attack, but said Ukraine was enjoying watching events and forecast more to come. Meanwhile, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu says that the West was stepping up equipment and arms supplies to Kyiv ahead of what he says will be large-scale Ukrainian offensive, and said Moscow will strike any supply routes it detected. Speaking on state television, Mr. Shoigu said Russia was inflicting effective fire damage on the enemy and that the Western weapons will not change the outcome of Moscow's special military operation, as they describe it, in Ukraine. He was speaking shortly after Ukraine launched its biggest ever drone attack on Moscow, though Shoigu's ministry says Russia's air defenses had destroyed all 8 of the drones. The 15-month operation has largely been fought inside Ukraine, though Russia has also experienced a number of drone attacks on its territory, including one targeting the Kremlin citadel earlier this month that Moscow said was an attempt to kill Russian President Vladimir Putin. Kiev also denied involvement in that attack. In the meantime, Russian investigators and forensic experts continue their inspection of residential blocks hit by drones in and around near Moscow after an overnight attack blamed on Ukraine. An investigator could be seen descending from the roof of a 25-story building on Atlasov Street in the Novaya Moscow district of the Russian capital to assess damage caused by the drone, which flew into the top of the building. The raid targeted some of the wealthiest areas in Moscow, including where Russian President Vladimir Putin and the elite have residences. Russia's defense ministry said 8 drones sent by Kyiv and targeting civilians were shot down or diverted, adding that 2 people were injured while some residents were briefly evacuated. And after the biggest ever drone strike on Moscow brought the Ukraine war to the Russian capital, Muscovites carried on with their lives and regular activity. On a warm spring day in the city center, residents could be seen relaxing in cafes and shopping in the well-stocked luxury stores of Moscow. Very few expressed concern at the news, and many expressed sadness that the conflict appeared to be escalating. One resident, named of Olga, who said she lived near to the site of one of the drone's collisions, called the strikes logical to be expected. Residents in southwestern Moscow said they heard the loud bangs followed by the smell of petrol. Some filmed the drone being shot down and a plume of smoke rising over the Moscow skyline. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said he saw no signs of aid fatigue amongst Western democracies regarding support for Ukraine. He was speaking ahead of a meeting of NATO foreign ministers in Oslo due to take place today and June the 1st, during which they're expected to set the agenda for the alliance's Vilnius summit taking place in July. Mr. Stoltenberg said he expected the alliance and its partners to continue and boost their support for Ukraine at the meeting in Lithuania. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan's election victory in Turkey had brought fresh momentum to efforts to break a deadlock over the ratification of Sweden's NATO membership, held up by objections from Turkey and Hungary. Now, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky appears to say some authorities were not doing enough to protect citizens during air raids. Speaking during an evening video address, he said it was the responsibility of specific officials for citizens to understand when and how the number and availability of shelters will increase. He spoke after Kyiv said 4 people died around Ukraine in Russia's latest attacks yesterday, with 34 wounded, including 2 children. The Armed Forces General Staff says Ukrainian air defense shot down 29 of 31 Iranian-made Shahed drones in Kyiv. Mr. Zelensky also says he spoke with Britain's biggest defense company, BAE Systems, on establishing a base in Ukraine for the production and repair of weaponry, including tanks and artillery. Meanwhile, a Ukrainian drone pilot stationed in the east to observe Russian movements near the border area says Ukraine's armed forces may not have enough equipment yet to launch a major counteroffensive against Russia. Kyiv is promising a counteroffensive, supported with Western weapons, to try to drive the Russian occupiers from territory seized in Moscow's self-styled special military operation. Asked about his country's preparedness for that offensive, the drone pilot going by the call sign Georgian said he was unsure the time was right just yet. He says, in his words, the forces that we now have may not be enough. Most likely, there's not enough equipment. Our work is very important because without intelligence, there can be no offensive. At a messy stalemate for most of the 2023, with Russian troops occupying some eastern Ukrainian regions, the war has killed tens of thousands of people, uprooted millions of people, reduced cities to rubble, and caused havoc in the global economy. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak will hold talks with U.S. President Joe Biden next week when they will discuss improving economic ties and how to sustain military support for Ukraine in its conflict with Russia. Sunak's spokesperson says the Prime Minister will be in Washington on Wednesday, June the 8th, and Thursday, June the 9th next week for meetings with Biden, members of the Congress, and U.S. business leaders. Sunak, who will be on his first official visit to Washington, says he was appointed Prime Minister in October, wants to forge better relations with the U.S. after they were strained by Britain's departure from the EU in 2020.
We announced this morning that President Biden looks forward to welcoming Prime Minister Sunak of the United Kingdom to the White House on Thursday, June 8th, to further deepen the close and historic partnership between the United States and the United Kingdom. The two leaders saw each other most recently, as you all know, in Hiroshima at the G7, and they have met several times this year, including Belfast in April and San Diego in March as well. During the visit, the two leaders will review a range of global issues, including our shared support for Ukraine as it defends itself against Russia's brutal war of aggression, as well as further action to bolster energy security and address the climate crisis. The President and the Prime Minister will also discuss efforts to continue strengthening our economic relationship, as well as we confront shared economic and national security challenges. They will also review developments in Northern Ireland as part of their shared commitment to preserving the gains of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, and to pre-exempt any questions that will come from here about a 2+2 press conference during the visit. Both leaders are looking forward to hosting a joint 2+2 press conference on June 8th, so you certainly could expect that. Should expect that from the two leaders on that day. Go ahead, T.
That's the U.S. Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre on the visit of the Prime Minister of the UK to the U.S. expected in a few. But we're pleased to speak with Mr. Tony Agwins, researcher, senior lecturer, Anglo-Ruskin University, joining us from London. It's good to have you with us this morning.
Yeah, good morning, Olumide.
If two countries were ever fast allies, it will be Britain and the U.S. It's tradition for every new prime minister to try to cement, improve these relations. But with the shadow of the Ukrainian conflict and the war precipitated by Russia, do you think this meeting between Sunak and President Biden will further help that relationship?
Yeah, thank you very much. You are very much spot on there. The UK and the United States, they are, very good allies, good friends. The two nations, in diplomatic circles, sometimes we describe it as a very sweet romantic relationship that has been for many years. No matter who, is leading both countries, any prime minister or president of the U.S., as the case may be. So you will see that since the new UK prime minister came on board, talking about the very young Rishi Sunak, he's had this very good chemistry with President Joe Biden of the United States. And like you stated in that report there, the U.S. press secretary, she was saying they've met a couple of times since Sunak came on board about 7 months ago. So this meeting is again an opportunity for both nations to declare their support for one another and pursuing their common goals, most of which is economic anyway, as you would expect in international relations. So we expect another round of strengthening of relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom. And more so, we also expect that the crisis between Russia and Ukraine is going to be on the front burner.
Indeed, whether it was Gordon Brown, Tony Blair, we can go back as far as Winston Churchill, UK prime ministers have always held that tradition of being close to the US. But in the case of Rishi Sunak, given the way he came to power, and given, well, it's not really mentioned, but given that he's the first of Indian descent, do you think he has a point to prove in international relations? He seems to be doing well with Mr. Zelensky.
Oh yes, he has a very big point to prove. If you look at the heritage of Rishi Sunak coming from an Indian background, and rising up to becoming Chancellor in the UK Parliament, in the UK government, I mean, and then becoming Prime Minister, it shows how the UK society has developed, the level of diversity, inclusion. Even though people still complain here, but when you look at the level of accommodation, the level of tolerating people from other climes that come to the United Kingdom, we will appreciate that it's a very good society and it's an example of a very inclusive nation. And then when you look at the US, as it were, you also see that there are people from diverse backgrounds, Spanish origin, Latinos. We've had a governor in the US, Arnold Schwarzenegger, who's from an Austrian background. He was governor of California for 8 years and did 2 tenures. So, and the other example. So when you look at these two nations and know whether they are where they are, they welcome people from every part of the world and everybody bringing different skill sets to the table. And then you begin to wonder, that is why probably they are one of the leading developed nations in the world. They welcome people. And then when you look into Ukraine, you will see that it is one of the things that Ukraine is also trying to do. They want to open up their society. They want to, relate with more of the Western nations, adopt more of Western culture and tradition, and, begin to build alliances with the West. And this is one of the reasons why the Russian, aggression came to be, and because Ukraine wants to join NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So it's all about relationship, alliances, and developing partnerships.
Finally, on this particular topic, concerning the visit of Sunak to President Biden, are you concerned about the hardline position both countries have taken, effectively distancing themselves from the negotiation table? After all, during World War II, they were all on the same side: Russia, America, and Britain.
Yes, I'm very, very concerned, and I'm sure most of us and most observers of global affairs, there's a lot of concern. Most of us think that the approach by the West, especially led by the US, Germany, France, and the UK, would have been maybe a bit more softer. This is just my opinion. Because this, like you put it, this hardline posture of the use of force, show of force, it's not helping this crisis. And I was listening to your report. We haven't getting to a stage where it could escalate to a nuclear crisis and the use of nuclear weapons. So I'm very, very concerned about the hardline posture.
Speaking of which, the nuclear possibility of this war, it should be a no-brainer, really, that the Zaporizhzhia power plant is a no-go area for both sides. Why does Rafael Grossi have to seem to cajole and to convince both parties to be safe concerning activity around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant?
Oh yes. The International Atomic Energy Agency, they are really worried because, at the start of the Russian aggression in February last year, precisely 17 months ago, Russia took control of the territory, where the nuclear power plant is. And we all know that Zaporizhia nuclear power plant is the largest in Europe. It's majorly for electricity. But being a nuclear facility, there are a lot of reactors there. But the Russians, they are in control of the territory, and the IAEA have always maintained that weapons should not be stored there. There should not be artillery fire from that, the perimeter of that power plant. But to surprise you to know that a lot of the power supply to that plant has been consistently being cut off. As we speak, that power plant, with a lot of reactors that need to be cooled all the time, they are now being powered by generators. And the IAEA, like Grossi was saying, is that at any time there could be a meltdown. And if there's a meltdown, it's going to lead to a serious nuclear crisis. Let's not forget what happened in Chechnya in Russia some years ago. Nobody wished to see a nuclear power plant, melting down. The crisis is going to have huge reverberations across the world. So the IAEA chief is very, very much well in his right to express his concern. And everybody is concerned because with the way this crisis is going, I may not be surprised, maybe a drone attack or artillery fire, missile dropping there, and then there could be a nuclear crisis on our hands.
Or should we just say both sides are just rattling their sabers? They know that they can't do anything that can put the entire region and maybe even the world in harm's way by continuing any activity that could threaten the safety of the nuclear power plant.
Yeah, the thing is, when it comes to a military crisis like this, you really cannot predict what is going to happen. You see, since this crisis started, there have been attacks, missile attacks, drone attacks, and then there is an indirect impact, misfire. So that is the fear of everybody, who have idea about military warfare and all the rest. There could be an error of fire. And then that could be it. So that is just the fear everybody is nursing. But let's just hope and be on the side of hope and positivity that such a fatal error doesn't happen. But the probability of it happening is very, very high. And I would say like 9 out of 10.
Wow. Well, for all our sakes, I hope that you're not correct. But to the Moscow incident with the drone attacks, President Putin says, and it's not surprising that he said that they were targeting civilians in this particular case. But if you listen to the mayor of Moscow, and if you listen to the people of Moscow, they've all said that they don't think that was the case. In some interviews, they think that possibly they were targeting somewhere else, and they ended up at that residential area. But given that residential area is for the rich and the wealthy, where the high net worth individuals in Moscow have residences, maybe that is not the case. Do you think Ukraine was specifically targeting civilians in this case?
I think a few weeks ago I was on this program, and we were also talking about the attack on the Kremlin, the true drone attack on the Kremlin, and there were a lot of conspiracy theory around it. Was it a flag operation by the Russians themselves? Was it a propaganda kind of scenario? Russia looking for an opportunity to really go all out and hit Ukraine with their military might. So there were a lot of talk around it, and nobody really understood it. And then I think investigation is still going on. Now, for the attack on the Moscow region, region with over 20 million inhabitants, like you said, a lot of wealthy people being there, and nobody can categorically state who sent the drones. I think about 8 were sent. But this is my personal opinion. Looking at the military might of Russia, or maybe it's just perception, how these drones could have evaded their defense system, is something that everybody is pondering. So again, just like what happened with the Kremlin attack a few weeks back, people are saying now that could this again be a propaganda, another flag operation by the Russians themselves? Could this actually be from Ukraine? They are just testing the waters. So nobody is really sure. But the other concern that came in is that why some people are calling for forensic investigation to know, because all these drones and missiles, they can actually determine the source from the location from where it was shot from. So that can be done, using technology. So people are calling for that investigation. But then when you look at the how do I put it? The different opinion coming from the US and the UK, that is a kind of worry. Ukraine, President Zelensky have said the drone was not shot by them, it's not from Ukraine. And then the UK Defense Secretary, James Cleverly, have said, Ukraine, they can do whatever they can do outside their border to protect their citizens. So that is a big worrying. And then the US have come up with a statement to say that they do not support any attack from Ukraine into Russian territory. And then you have people on the other side who are saying, hang on, but the Russians have been, bombarding Kyiv, Zaporizhzhia, Mariupol, a lot of Ukrainian cities. They've been doing it. So why is it that just now that this has happened, why they worry? And just last night, early this morning, there was another attack on a Russian oil refinery. So, Olumide, when you look at this crisis, I think it's just expanding in a kind of, in a way that nobody really expected at this time.
Thank you so much for your contribution today. To pick up on something you said, if the Russians have gone to the extent of attacking their own facilities to garner support from their own people and to make Ukraine look bad, then they've descended to levels that show extreme desperation. But the jury's out. We don't know if that was the case. Thank you so much, Mr. Tony Agwins, researcher, senior lecturer, Anglia Ruskin University, who joined us from London.
Thank you, Olumide. Have a nice day.
You too. After the break, Ukraine lowers enlistment age for young adults to 25. Details in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back to our special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. Russia's Interior Ministry has put Ukraine's top general, Valery Zaluzhny, on a wanted list. Now, according to Russia's RIA news agency, the Colonel General Alexander Syrsky, the commander of Ukraine's ground forces, was also added to the list. The RIA says the ministry did not explain why the 2 Ukrainian officials were wanted. U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham was added to Russia's wanted list earlier this week. Now, Ukrainian lawmakers have voted in favor of reducing the maximum age of military enlistment for young adults from 27 to 25. Ukraine's parliament said in a Telegram post, which partly reads, the majority of citizens now receive a deferment from conscription for military service upon reaching the age of 18. It's mainly about getting an education. Education lasts for 4 to 6 years and ends at the age of 22 to 24. With the reduction of the maximum conscription age to 25 years, the conscription commission will have 1 to 3 years to realize the fulfillment of military duty by citizens of Ukraine and their conscription for military service. Under Ukrainian law, the conscription process for young adults includes registering at an enlistment office, undergoing necessary medical examinations, and being selected for military service if no exemptions made and deferments were included. NATO countries are in the middle of Arctic military maneuvers, vowing to defend their newest member, Finland, which is hosting its first joint NATO exercise since becoming the 31st member of the Western Alliance in April. The addition of Finland doubles the length of the border with NATO that it shares with Russia, which launched a large-scale invasion of another neighbor, Ukraine, in February last year. Now, nearly 1,000 allied forces from the United States, Britain, and Norway, and also from neighboring Sweden, joined some 6,500 Finnish troops and some 1,000 vehicles for the Northern Forest exercise, Finland's biggest modern-time land force drill above the Arctic Circle.
I know this is the biggest exercise in Rovajärvi exercise area, at least during my years at the service. 7,500 soldiers, it's very big amount.
U.S. Army is here training to, with our newest NATO ally, to build that capability to help defend Finland if anything happens. That's our commitment to them.
We have prepared plans on what to do if we are to be part of the defense of Finland. It's in the Finnish-Swedish cooperation, and it's a political task and it's prepared on the tactical level.
Newly recruited servicemen for Ukraine's Rage Storm Brigade are getting battle-ready, holding shooting drills, firing practice in an undisclosed location in the country's Odessa region. Rage is one of the new Storm Brigades totaling 40,000 soldiers that Ukraine wants to use during the planned counteroffensive against Russian forces. Video released by the National Police in Odessa region shows servicemen firing rifles, moving in formations, and delivering first aid as acting Chief of Naval Police Ivan Yevrsky watched over. The units have benefited from an aggressive recruiting campaign launched in March on social media and billboards with the aim of attracting highly motivated volunteers. The new brigades, drafted by the Interior Ministry, will fight alongside regular army units bolstered by new Western battle tanks and thousands of fresh troops trained by allied armies outside Ukraine. A Ukrainian official said Kyiv is looking for a guarantee from Moscow and the United Nations that the Black Sea grain deal will work normally if it allows Russian ammonia to transit through the country. Now, Russia agreed to a 2-month extension of the Black Sea grain deal earlier this month, but has said the initiative will cease unless an agreement to overcome obstacles, including ammonia, is fulfilled. The transit of ammonia, an essential part of nitrogen-based fertilizers, was halted via the pipeline after Russia's invasion. Now let's talk to Captain Bish Johnson, retired U.S. Army captain, national defense and military strategist. Thank you for being with us this morning.
Morning, and thank you for having me, Olamide.
Olumide. Thank you for joining us. Now, I'd like to begin with this conscription issue. This is the news that those who are squeamish of war would not like to have or to receive. And that news is the lowering of the conscription age from 27 to 25 on the part of the Ukrainians. Now, for the Russians, if we look at both parties, President Putin and President Zelensky, experience is on the side of Putin. Determination is on the side of President Zelensky, and patriotism and nationalism. As far as conscription goes, Putin's own father was a conscript. He was injured during one of the world wars. So for those that thought at the beginning that this is David and Goliath situation, the Ukrainians are outnumbered, they are outweaponed, if I can use that term. That was the argument. And now, with this conscription age lowered in Ukraine, what's your impression? Does this send a message that concerning this counteroffensive, they don't have enough men to prosecute the defense and the war against Russia?
Olamide, in every stage of this conflict, the Ukrainians have surprised the world. You know, when this invasion began in February last year, the conclusion was that Moscow was going to overrun Kyiv, they were going to decapitate the Zelensky's administration, and they would take over the entire Ukraine. None of that has happened. The initial objectives of the Russians failed, and they begin to adjust their objectives to the point of now that what they are looking at is the Donbass region, the eastern part of Ukraine, which is not happening again. So anything the Ukrainians are doing right now, I am not surprised. Looking at the way this whole conflict has unfolded, I will personally conclude that the Ukrainians have a more professional armed forces than what we thought the Russians had. Before now, Russia used to be a very revered and feared country in terms of their military might, but this conflict has exposed a lot of weakness in Russia. If you look at their conscription, you see how that of the Ukrainians is very professional. Compare it to what happened in Russia. You saw mass exodus of Russians trying to leave their country because they didn't want to be conscripted. You saw the Wagner group going to prison to conscript people in the prison and bring them into as a fighting force. So if you look at this whole thing, it's very, very bizarre what has happened in Russia when you compare it to what is happening in Ukraine. They seem to be more organized, more professional, even though they are we see them as the David and the Russians as the Goliath, but they have exceeded most people's expectation. They exceeded my own expectation. I thought that this thing would have been over within 72 hours, just like what the Russians did in Crimea when they took over Crimea. But let me tell you, Mr. Putin made a very reckless miscalculation when it comes to this invasion. He chose to carry out this invasion when one of the most experienced human beings to assume the presidency of the United States of America is the President of America. Joseph R. Biden Jr., nobody has ascended that office who is more experienced than Joseph R. Biden. The man has been in Washington for nearly half a century. Okay, he knows every country, he knows every leader, and he knows what to do. And he is not Barack Obama. He is to the right of Barack Obama. He's a center-left Democrat. You can say that he's more hawkish than Barack Obama. So Mr. Putin chose the wrong time when the most experienced individual is the President of the United States to carry out this invasion. And that is why the Russian invasion is collapsing as far as most analysts is concerned, because they are not achieving their primary objectives. So they continue to adjust, move the goalposts, really, backward.
Sorry to come in here. I'm surprised you said that, because I thought that President Biden, though his political history very long, has a lot of experience, as far as foreign policy is concerned, he was wrong majority of the time, and that's why his critics in the Republican Party didn't place a lot of confidence and faith in his decisions for foreign policy.
Well, look, when you come to American politics, there is no president who will not be wrong as far as the opposition is concerned. If you ask the Democrats, they will tell you that Ronald Reagan was wrong. Okay. Now, if you ask the Republicans, they will tell you that John F. Kennedy was wrong. That is opposition politics. So they will never admit that, their opponent is right. But let me tell you, Joe Biden is more hawkish than Barack Obama. Had he been the president of the United States when Russia, took over Crimea, it probably wouldn't have happened. Okay, he's more hawkish. He's more. He's to the right of Barack Obama. He's a kind of center.
If he's more hawkish than Barack Obama, sorry to interrupt you. If he's more hawkish than Barack Obama, then why the withdrawal of the American troops from Afghanistan in that fashion, when advisors were saying that that should have been done gradually so that the Afghanistan people won't be overrun by the fundamentalist Afghanistan operatives?
Look, let me tell you, the withdrawal of American forces from Afghanistan was not, it wasn't Joseph R. Biden that put it in place. This was an agreement that was already concluded by the previous president, Donald Trump. Let me tell you, as far as the military people are concerned, that is their profession. They will want to be at war. That's their job. There is no time that would have been better to withdraw these forces. It's just postponing the doomsday. Eventually, the forces are going to be withdrawn. You've been at war for over 20 years. So at what time will be better for you to withdraw? So there will never, as far as the military is concerned, there will never be a good time for withdrawal. Now, as far as how the thing was withdrawn, now America never anticipated that after all the commitment and investment they've made in the Afghan military, particularly their Air Force ought to have been probably the sixth most powerful Air Force based on the investment that the Americans had made in their Air Force. That their military, their security forces, all of them combined will just collapse, within a matter of days, collapsed by a ragtag, Taliban of very few hundreds in numbers would have overrun them the way they did. Nobody anticipated that because there were a lot of commitment and investment in the security forces of Afghanistan. Now, compared to what is happening in Ukraine, you see how professional the Ukrainians are. You see how resilient they are. You see how they are able to utilize the military aid and investment that is being made in their armed forces to achieve, in fact, to stop the Russians. In fact, they have pretty much stopped the Russians. This war is going to be a war of attrition. I listened to your comment with the other speaker, why the West is taking a hard line in terms of negotiation. You don't expose yourself when it comes to negotiation. You have to push your opponent, push him to the wall before you talk about negotiation. That is what the West is doing. That's what the Russians are doing. The first person to cave is going to get the short end of the stick. That is why you're seeing both Zelensky and the West taking the hard line that they're taking right now, because they don't want to put themselves in a position of weakness. If you put yourself in a position of weakness, now when it's time for negotiation, you're going to get less of what you expect. That is why you see those two hardline positions.
Captain Bish, now the Russian army, do you think that one of the reasons why they haven't done as well as many have expected, including yourself, is because of the fact that they cannot invade Ukraine in such a way as to inflict civilian casualties, knowing that one of the very purposes for which they were invading Ukraine, as propounded by Putin, is that the ethnic Russians in Ukraine were being oppressed by Zelensky. And he talked about, as many consider, wild allegations of Nazification in Ukraine. So therefore, they can't just go there and bomb everything and kill everyone and win the war because they don't want to have civilian casualties. Is that one of the uphill battles that Putin is finding difficult to engage in?
No, contrary to that, the reason why you don't have ground forces, Russian ground forces in Ukraine, is because if they do that, they are going to sustain even more heavy casualties that they have already done. The Russian ground force is almost rendered useless. They are less professional. They are not well trained. They don't have the kind of command, chain of command that the U.S. military has. In the U.S. military, the NCOs are allowed to make decisions based on what is on ground. And so you don't need to run up the chain of command to get approval before you can take action. So you can take certain actions right there on the ground, because you know that running in a situation of war, running up to the chain of command to get approval. By the time that approval comes down, it's too late. So they are not structured like that. The Russians are not structured like that. That is one point. Another point is that the ground forces of Russia still rely in old way of logistics to move personnel, move fuel, move equipment, and that exposes them. You saw it at the beginning of the invasion where they were stored. You had this long chain of train carrying equipment were stored. So that is why they are not using their ground forces. Their ground force is almost rendered useless. The Air Force is even completely useless. How many of their fighter jets do you see in the airspace of Ukraine? Because they just can't do that. It would be a suicide mission for their pilots to even fly into Ukraine. So that is the reason. It's not that they don't want to kill as many people as they have killed so many people. In fact, you kill more people when you are standing from a long distance and launching missiles and huge artillery weapons. You kill indiscriminately. That is why you've seen that the casualties in terms of civilian casualties is very, very high. If they had had a ground force that is well trained and professional, you won't have that amount of civilian casualties because the ground forces, their attacks will be targeted. With these long-range missiles and artilleries, they're just throwing these things indiscriminately and increasing the volume of collateral damages by attacking civilian targets and killing civilians, as to compare to when you have a professional ground force that will go, they will map out the military targets and focus on those military targets, and you have a very reduced civilian casualty.
I'm sure many will beg to differ on your opinions concerning the professionalism of the Russian army and whether the Ukrainian army are a superior army now, as you've said, in combat. But thank you so much for your views.
I have not said that they are superior army. Russian military is still a very potent military because of the equipment that they have. Right? But as far as in training and what they have, the capability they have displayed in this Ukrainian conflict, one can assume that if you provide that kind of opportunity to the Ukrainians, they will do better than the Russians.
Your opinions are appreciated. Thank you for coming on the program this morning. Captain Bish Johnson, retired U.S. Army captain, national defense and military strategist, joined us from Abuja.
Thank you very much, Olamide, for having me.
When we return, Australian arts take the stage as Vivid Festival lights up Sydney. Details in a moment. Please join us again.
Insightful. Join us as we connect with the global community of Nigerians around the world. We talk about life in the diaspora, flying the Nigerian flag, their culture, socio-political activities, and survival stories on Channels Television.
Britain is quite a racist country, and where they see asylum seekers on the street and they have a very poor opinion of them.
Diaspora Network, engaging diasporans for development.
Welcome back to our special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. We'll now turn our attention to how the lines blur in the world of business and how it's affecting the conflict in both nations. Ini John Mekwa is with us in the studio this morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah.
Poland, who are stringent opposers of Russia at this point, have suspended their freight traffic registered in Belarus and Russia. That's to be expected. They are not making any bones about their disgust with the Russian invasion.
And you know, there's a new word around that Poland. It's called Russophobia. So like Russia phobia. So people now have a phobia for Russia, you know. So the blocking of freight or transportation is not just from Poland to Russia and Belarus. Right. It's also on the other way also. So Russia has stopped every movement, freight movement from Poland into Russia. Belarus has done the same thing, and of course Poland has done the same thing. So all those at first it used to be increase of fines and, you know, duties, But now they say from the 1st of June anyway, that it's going to be total blockage. So there's no vehicle, especially articulated vehicle that normally would carry food items, you know, this agricultural stuff. None of them will be able to pass, or registered in Russia or registered in Belarus will be allowed to go into Poland, and vice versa.
Right. And the walls are coming up at the border between Russia and Finland. Finland as well have a hardline position against Russia.
Yes, and they have a wall that is coming up at the border. I think this is just a little part of it that is coming up. I should be ready, I think, by the end of June. Do
they intend to build a wall across the whole border between
That's what they say, and I think it's going to be totally ready about 2024, 2026. You know, so I was just thinking, what if the war ends today? The world is so global and interconnected that, I mean, we've talked about how some goods, EU goods end up in Russia, and oil from Russia goes into India, is being refined and ends up in EU, and gas and all of that, you know. But I mean, they know what they're doing, but it's costing them some money. And then you would think that at this time when there's austerity in a lot of countries, if this is actually, you know,
wish we had more time. The same wall issue between America and the United States and Mexico that was didn't sit
the
well
wall, that the former president.
The Democrats. Thanks, Ini.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ini. More from Ini John Mekwa on Business Morning after this program. Finally, Ukrainian tennis player Lesia Serenko beat her first-round opponent at the French Open on Tuesday, but described her disposition as unhappy. Serenko, who lived in Kiev as a teenager, says the Russian invasion and subsequent war in her country has impacted her state of mind on the court. Speaking to the media on her 34th birthday, an emotional Serenko was not in a celebratory mood and says it has to do with the fact that her city was bombed about 16 times in May alone, and not because she wants to spread hate. She says part of Tuesday's rocket landed about 100 meters away from her own home. Ahead of the Miami Open in March, the world number 2, Aryna Sabalenka, who is from Belarus, says she struggled to understand the hate she encountered in the locker room amidst strained relations between some players following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Sabalenka did not specifically mention Serenko. Now, Serenko's next competition is at Roland Garros on Thursday against the American Lauren Davis. We expect we'll have that conversation about how the war in Ukraine is impacting athletes from around the globe. And that's it on today's special edition of Russian Invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Thank you for watching. Do have a great day and see you tomorrow.